Hello, welcome to the 11th video in the online orientation for SDE Teachers 2017-2018. This video is on lesson observation criteria, so the set of criteria we will use to evaluate oral English lessons for SDE. Here is the overview. We're going to be looking again at the lesson observation process, then a quick recap of the SDE lesson planning that we spoke about in the previous video, then talking about lesson execution so that we can establish what is our benchmark, and then using those benchmarks we can establish certain lesson observation criteria. Let's go through the lesson observation process again. First, we'll start by notifying the school and the foreign teacher to let them know that we'd like to come and make a lesson observation and check that they will be available during a certain period of time so that we can arrange a lesson observation. We won't give a specific date and time for the observation, just a range of time within which we may come to visit the school. But we have to make some sort of advance notice to make sure that there's been no changes to schedule, nothing unexpected will happen, and that our visit won't be wasted. At this point, we would expect the foreign teacher to provide a plan in advance. We need a lesson plan so that we can evaluate how successful the teacher was in executing that plan during the lesson. Then we will perform some kind of real-time or potentially video observation. The reason why we'd like to keep this option is that we have very many teachers all over Shenzhen, and it may not always be possible to visit the school in person to conduct the lesson observation. So we may ask a contact teacher or a specialist to record the video and then provide that to the academic consultant to evaluate. After this process, especially if we've gone to the school in person, we will provide hot feedback to the teacher to let them know what we think of their lesson, how successful it was, ask them about their opinion, and provide some on-the-spot advice and mentoring and suggestions for how to improve. After that, we would provide some more considered analysis and feedback with a score. This will be shared with the foreign teacher and also shared with the school and perhaps the business divisions of SDE, so that everyone can get a feel for how well that teacher is doing at that school and whether any problems have been identified that need to be dealt with in the future. And that's where the following step comes in, which is any kind of follow-up. So is there a performance improvement plan? Is there a requirement for an extra lesson observation or any kind of focused training to help this teacher to improve? Next, we'll do a quick recap of the SDE lesson planning. So what needs to be in a plan? Remember, content, so covering the title, the topic, the target language, the age of the students, the level of the students, where they might be within the year and the semester, what textbook they might be using, how long their lesson is, all of these details that can make us make a good judgment about whether the content of the lesson is appropriate. Next, the goals, very important for setting the standard, for setting the target for what you want to achieve in your lesson. If we have these goals clearly stated in the lesson plan, and when we observe the lesson, we'll be able to evaluate your lesson against those goals. Next, materials. We want to see, have you clearly considered what materials you're going to need, how to design them, and to prepare them in advance for your lesson. So these should be listed. Next, the meat of your lesson, the structure, all of the steps. Has this been carefully planned? And when you execute your lesson, have you executed it according to this plan? Did you anticipate problems and solutions? And were you able to respond effectively to these problems in the class? And are you using this structure of PPP, presentation, practice, and production, to build up your students' confidence, to scaffold their learning through the class so that they can later use the language with more confidence? And finally, we want to consider all four of these things together when we're assessing your lesson, when we're observing your lesson. So, having already established the plan, we now want to consider how that plan is executed in the lesson. So we need to look at lesson execution. So how do we judge lesson execution? First of all, classroom management. the execution and use of rules, any kind of passive methods that you might be using to control your class, and other factors that might be influencing the behavior of the students in the class that we need to take into account, maybe mitigating factors with certain things that may have happened that are out of your control. Next, instructions and demonstrations. So how clearly are you instructing the students in your activities, demonstrating what you want them to do, how well they're understanding what you want them to do, and how well you're modeling these activities, and then using instruction checking questions to make sure that they understand clearly what they have to do in each activity. Engagement. So how well you and the way that you present your lesson and use the materials that you've provided to the students and prepared, how well that engages their interest, draws them in, gets them excited, and gets them to concentrate on what you're presenting to them, sharing with them, and the activities that you're getting them involved in. Next, participation. So this is one fairly objective measure of success. If we look around the classroom and we see how many of the students you are engaging in activities, you are drawing in and getting to participate in your class, then we can measure how effective you are at reaching all of the students in your class. Goals. You will have set goals in your plan. We will then use those goals to judge how effectively you've delivered your plan. Okay, so finally our lesson observation criteria. Now that we've considered everything that we expect to see in a plan and how we will judge lesson execution, we can put all of these things together to get our criteria. So in the plan, we have our content, our goals, our materials, and our structure. Then we have the lesson execution, classroom management, instruction and demos, engagement, classroom participation, and the goals. Is there anything else we need to consider? Yes, your appearance and your punctuality. These may seem like fairly basic things, and for most teachers this will be just a simple case of turning up as you would normally, and you will get 100% for these two aspects. But they're important, and sometimes people will fail to get full marks on these, so be careful. Make sure you dress appropriately and that you turn up and prepare for your lesson on time. So what needs to be evaluated? Well, all of these things need to be evaluated, and this is the scoring system that we will use, splitting the evaluation into two clear sections: your preparation for the lesson, which is part of its execution, and here we have this forming half of your marks. It's important that you have planned correctly and that you have prepared appropriately for your lesson before the bell goes. All of these things can be prepared and can be ready, and if they are to a good standard, you will score well here. In terms of execution, these are the things that you can influence once the class has started, and the way that you execute your class to manage the behavior of the students, make sure they don't get out of control, to clearly instruct and demonstrate activities so that those activities use the time as effectively as possible, and engage the students and interest them so that they participate as much as possible in your class, and ultimately bring you success in the goals that you have set for your lesson. I will be making the lesson observation form available. This has a rubric which goes into a little bit more detail about how each of these different aspects will be marked during a lesson observation. Okay, that's the end of this video on lesson observation criteria. Up next we have a lesson demonstration video of kindergarten teaching in Shenzhen.